Over the last 25 years, I've had the privilege of interviewing and highlighting some truly interesting people. Everyone who is anyone, both the famous and the infamous, from presidents and their first ladies to kings and queens, movie stars and pop stars, captains of industry, heads of state, sports personalities, innovative entrepreneurs, and some pretty fascinating everyday people. Today, I'm proud to introduce you to Alan Brings, a lifelong professional musician and professor emeritus of music, with a very interesting story to tell us about his passion for the art. Alan, it's such a pleasure to meet you, sir.
As it is meeting you.
Wonderful. I know that music and musicians bring me joy, but I'm not sure exactly what a musician does. So why don't you explain it to us?
Well, it began when I was a little boy. I wasn't aware of it at the time, but my both of my parents were interested in music. So coming out of the radio, by the way, there was no television in those days. This goes back to about what, 1947, uh, long before you were even born. Um, so that I'm sure I was listening to music, but how I was affected by it is very hard to say. But there's one thing which became very important because my father, who was an immigrant, but who, before he came to this country, had studied some music, studied voice, uh, and also was able to go to concerts. We heard some very outstanding musicians, and it was because he obtained certain 78 RPM recordings. I won't explain to you what a 78 RPM recording is, but those early recordings consisted of performances by um, uh, people who perhaps were more interested in Negro spirituals. Marian Anderson was
Yes.
an example of that. And although I think my father may have purchased these recordings of Marian Anderson for him to hear, but it was I who would listen to them over and over again. And these two recordings consisted of music by Schubert, Handel, Bach, and this is something that stayed with me for the rest of my life. So that when I went to a performance of one of Marian Anderson's students in Katona, New York, I saw her. I think she may have been sitting in a car during the intermission. And what I really wanted to do was to go over there and thank her for beginning my love of music by hearing her recording. And the reason I didn't is that if I had, I would have been in tears and I would have only embarrassed her. But this has stuck with me ever since. And many of the attitudes I have about so called classical music were determined by those early experiences. And I can explain a number of other experiences as well. Now, something else which my parents noticed, who were interested in serious music, was that if they heard me listen to the Marine Corps hymn, I would go to our grand piano and with my index finger, I would pick it out. And when they noticed that, they said to themselves, I think maybe we ought to let him have piano lessons. So they found a Hungarian refugee in 1940, what was it? Yes, around 47, 51. And they asked her whether they would give me piano lessons. Now, she was also not just an immigrant. She brought her daughter with her. She knew how to play the piano well. She knew a lot about music. And she may even have been a member of an aristocratic Hungarian family. But it was the 4 years that I spent with her, which she introduced me to simple but very interesting music by J.S. Bach and other composers. And because in order to play them, I had to live with them for a few months. I not only learned how to play the piano, I learned how to listen to
Mm.
music and to enjoy it, something which has stayed with me for the rest of my life. But the experience I have to listening to music is not just mental. It's that I use my brain, but I also use my heart.
Mhm.
And the older I have grown, the more intense I feel about music. So that when I listen to music, let's say on Classic Arts Showcase or on the Medici channel, and I've heard some of the greatest performances using those avenues. And if the music was familiar to me, it didn't matter. The more familiar to me, the more intense I felt about it.
You've told me about your passion, you told me where it came from, but I'm just curious, when did you know you actually wanted to pursue a career in music?
I never thought of a career. I only thought of doing what I enjoyed
Good.
doing. And even all of the things that I did later on, um, writing all this music that I write now, I've composed about 250 compositions. Is that being a career? No, I don't think so. It's enjoying the act of composing. Observing my teachers at Queens College taught me something about how, if you're a superb musician, as they all were, uh, they would not just be musicians, but they would have to do something which would earn them salaries. Now, something like that began to happen when I went to Columbia University as a master's student. And that's, by the way, where I met my wife, who was one of the best musicians I had ever known, who was a superb pianist and who was a very good composer. In fact, being such a good pianist, she was asked by me to join with me in performing a performance of my Passacaglia Interlude and Fugue, which I had originally written for organ, but which I rewrote for piano duet. And that was my excuse to perform with her. And of course, after that, we began to have a career as
I
a
love that.
performing duo pianist. But being at Queens College, no, being at Columbia University and studying with the first rate composer by the name of Otto Luning also provided me with certain skills, so that when I was in the Army, I was drafted, by the way. I did not volunteer to be
Mhm.
in the U.S. Army. When I got into the Army, I served for 2 years, and originally I was a Morse code radio operator, which I learned to be at Fort Knox in Kentucky.
Well, that
And
actually makes sense because music is its own language. And if you are interpreting language, you're basically feeding your passion for the country also.
that, yes, that's a good point, which I'm glad you made. Now, I spent a year and a half as a trooper with a with the Second Armored Cavalry Regiment in West Germany, which was then on the border between the East and the West. And we were reminded that the reason I and my members of the regiment were there was to discourage the Soviet Union from attacking us. But it also did something else, which rather surprised me. I was expecting to be a Morse code radio operator in West Germany with this regiment. However, I was interviewed one day by the conductor of the regimental band, which was stationed not in the city where I was, Bamberg, but was stationed in Nuremberg. And somehow they must have found out what my training consisted of, how I had studied piano, I studied composition, I studied conducting, I studied how to write my native language, how to write program notes, how to get to the front of the stage and talk to an audience using language that they could understand, because there might not have been any musicians among them.
It sounds like you took all of your personal and interpersonal experiences and applied them to your passion, and that's what actually formulated your career. Alan, let me just, you've mentioned them a couple of times. You mentioned your parents, you mentioned your wife, Genevieve. What role do you think that your family played in your actual success?
Well, the very fact that they enjoyed serious music and were serious about their attitudes toward it, and which is something that I thought, well, maybe I ought to be serious too, except that being serious at the time was uh, reinforced by my enjoying it and understanding it. And I realized that that's what they were doing. They had already learned how to enjoy it and understand it. So I was being the way they were. in many respects. And in dealing with all of the younger people later on, whom I worked with or
Mhm.
whom I taught, all of these factors became very alive for me. And without them, I doubt I would have had the career, if you want to call it that, which I began to have.
Let me ask you, Alan, what moves you as a musician? And along those lines, what influences do you think can be found in your work as a composer? Because I know that's very important for the listener to listen to for enjoyment purposes.
Well, one of the things I learned by studying music as a music major at Queens College was the music that composers wrote in the 14th century.
Mm.
Even they were only beginning to learn something about that. There was a composer who was famous in his time in the 14th century. And when I listened to his music, I understood why he was considered a great composer. And then, having been so excited by that experience, I started to listen to other music from the next century and the century after that.
The ability to really take what moves you, what
Yes.
gives you passion, and turn it into a successful career. That's not something that everybody can do.
Well, let me start with family. Genevieve and I have a daughter by the name of Kira. Uh, she, when she was born, taught me something about love, which I didn't know about love. I thought by dealing with Genevieve, I knew something about love. But when Kira was born, there was an intensity of love which I experienced and which I have never, ever forgotten.
Wow.
But also, it has to do with not drawing attention to me. If I get to the front of the stage and speak about the music I'm about to perform, whether it's mine or someone else's, I'm not speaking about me. And one of the things that always bothers me, if I'm in the audience and a composition of mine is being performed, I'm usually asked to stand up and acknowledge the applause. I would rather not. The music is not about me, it's about the music. So I don't
That
want to
sounds
be
like great
singled out.
advice.
Pardon me?
I'm sorry, that sounds like great advice. And that actually leads me to one of my last couple of questions. What advice would you pass on to other professionals who are chasing their dreams, especially if it's a music or in the arts?
Do something that they truly respect. If they perform music, do they think it's a good piece? Uh, it should be a good piece if they're playing it for somebody else, but maybe it should be a good piece because they are playing it. I want people to listen to music and appreciate it and enjoy it the way I began to do it when I was a little boy, and where I do it even more intensely now that I won't tell you what that age is yet. That should be the reason why I think they would want to listen to what I have to say. Because if I got something out of it, boy, there's a big chance that they might also get something out of it.
That is just the most fantastic way of thinking about it. Um, you have just convinced me that music is not just music. Music is, in fact, life itself. It's
Yes.
a
Yeah.
way of just conveying the passion in your soul, your commitment to encouraging and supporting and loving other people. It is truly its own language. And Alan, it's been a pleasure to have you introduce us to your world of music. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for having the patience of listening to me.
I enjoyed the conversation, sir. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.